Hi, I'm Tim. This is my entry for the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. I built a solid body electric. I used 8-quarter poplar from my local store, along with a 5-quarter maple board that I found to make the necks. That's a good thing I bought more than I needed because I ended up having to redo a few things. Once I had the poplar cut to size, I went ahead and joinered it on my router table. I set that up with a 50 thousandths acrylic shim on the outfeed, so it makes a pretty good straight joint. As long as I'm careful about orientation, they made up really nice. And once joinered, they were ready for glue up. And then we'll let that spend a day in the clamps. Fretboard I used is Richlight. I bought it pre-slotted and pre-radiused, knowing that I didn't quite have the tools or skills to take on that challenge yet. Apparently I also don't have the tools or skills to open up a nut slot properly, so here I am making a hack job of it, and this Richlight is hard stuff, so fortunately I was able to coax it into cooperation. The body was cut out on my little bandsaw. It took forever, which is why there's so many little cutoffs. Once the body was roughed out on the bandsaw, it was easy enough to take it to the spindle sander and get it to shape. So I built my first guitar last year during the 2020 build along, and I discovered at that time that I needed several things in order to make this a whole lot more enjoyable. One was a good solid workbench. Another was this spindle sander. The router table I had already built, but I would definitely like to upgrade that in the future. And then for this build, I also went ahead and bought a bandsaw and a little drill press. Here we are using the router table and a fence with a 1/4 inch straight cutting bit to cut the slot for the truss rod. Went ahead and marked where to start and stop and just took it in shallow passes until it was the right depth. And once the truss rod slot was completely cut, I made a little opening for the access to the net. The only other neck I ever built from scratch I had to cut out with a jigsaw, and this bandsaw made my life so much easier. And just like the body blank, once the neck was roughed out to shape on the bandsaw, we could take it over to the spindle sander and get it smoothed out down to the outlines. For gluing on the fingerboard, I went ahead and sanded the back of the Richlight to 80 grit. That's recommended by the folks that make it. And then I just glued it up with Type Bond. I used a locating pin in the nut slot. It was just made of a round wooden toothpick. And my cobbled together clamping caul here with the pressure treated 2x4 and some oak strips to raise it up over the center. But it worked really well. I got a great bond. Everything's nice and solid. Type Bond works great for these Richlight fretboards as long as you prep it properly. Make sure the clamping pressure is nice and even, and then we'll let that sit overnight as well. Come back the next day, and I strapped a makeshift fence to my spindle sander so that I could sand the fretboard transition at the headstock end and get the headstock thickness properly. And then it was a simple matter to put the neck in my vise, use a leveling beam to go ahead and straighten out everything and get it properly tapered. I use a piece of sandpaper over a small sample of sheet glass as my flattening surface for making nuts. That seems to work pretty well. Use a triangular file to bevel the fret slots a little bit so everything sits nice and flush. It goes in really straight and simple. And then with my rubber mallet, I've always been able to simply drive frets in pretty controlled and carefully, but this Richlight is much harder stuff than the woods I'm formerly used to using. What ended up happening was after repeated blows, that plastic hammerhead would soften and then wouldn't be able to drive as sturdy, so I'd have to change them out every few frets, keep enough rigidity for the hammering. Here's my cobbled together file. I used the masking tape and super glue trick on a scrap of 2x6 to trim the fret ends flush and then bevel them. Now we're prepping for side dots. We're just using simple plastic rod. Super glue them in, tap them home, and then use that leveling bead to flush them up to the side of the fretboard. Prepping for the neck pocket, we remove some of the waste with the drill press and a big Forstner bit, and then it's a simple matter to go around with the router and clean it all out. And we're moments from disaster. Yep, another lesson learned. I'll be buying a plunge router. But, as Ben is fond of saying, there's very few things you can't recover from, and so we pressed on with the job at hand, and then it was a simple matter to make a little patch and inlay it into the top of the guitar there. It was always the plan to paint this a solid color, so not really that big a deal, and it doesn't telegraph much through the finish. Finish routing out the pickup cavities, clean everything up, and then we can flip it over and get onto the controls. Finish getting that cavity to depth, and then we're back to the front to locate the bridge. These hip shop bridges, they have a PDF cut sheet on the website for their offset. I just aligned it, laid it out, and then began boring all the holes for it. For the string holes, we'll go all the way through the body on just the outside, the first and sixth strings. And then for the 4 holes between, we'll only go halfway to depth, and you'll see why when we turn it over. From the back side, we use those outer 2 holes to locate where the inner 4 should be aligned. Then we can lay them out and begin drilling the recesses for the string ferrules. I used a 5/16 brad point bit just to get them started, create a little recess. And then I could transition to a standard auger bit with a stop collar to make sure all 6 of the holes were the exact same depth. And now that those string ferrule holes have been drilled, we can go back from the back side and drill through the centers to meet up with the string holes on the face. I used my coarse brass to relieve a little bit of the heel. I wanted a slight taper there just for comfort. And I ended up using some shorter neck mounting screws on that side as well, just to make sure I didn't go through the back of the fretboard. And then using that same rasp, I go ahead and rough in the tummy cut on the back for comfort. Back on the front side, we can use Forstner bits to drill the holes for the 2 potentiometers and the 3-way toggle switch. And then we can locate the neck mounting screws as well. Take that over to the drill press, drill those all the way through, and then from the back side, that'll show us where to drill recesses for the neck mounting ferrules. Using my coarse brass, now I'm relieving a bit of the front for a forearm comfort carve. I ended up actually taking this a little bit deeper than even this video shows, and I really like how comfortable that feels in the forearm. And we're sanding the sides, getting ready for round overs. So we use a round over bit in the router table, make simple passes, the back and the front. A couple of little danger areas with the contours, but be careful of keeping the bearing in contact and everything worked out fine. Now I'm making templates for my scratch plate, which is just a surface mounted piece of regular pickguard material. While I was at it, I made a template for the control cavity cover as well, and here I am routing the flush and putting a little bevel on the pickguard. On the body, I used a countersink the holes for the pickguard mounting screws, and then I used my trim router to flush the openings for the pickup and the neck pocket. That worked out really nice. And then neck carving kit. Using my coarse rasp again, I laid out some facets on the back of my neck blank and just started removing the waste. And here in Oklahoma, it's been a really hot and humid summer so far. Working out in the garage was starting to get pretty miserable by this point, but I kept at it. With a big box fan there, I had some good airflow, and just despite all the sweat, just kept working. Combination of rasps and files and scrapers and sandpaper. I worked it top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right, right to left. Basically just tried to keep it as smooth and uniform as possible. A bit of an asymmetrical neck heel there just because the pocket is cut that way. With the fairly aggressive offset of the body, I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of good access. And there is. Contour sanding with some emery cloth, and once everything was fine sanded, I raised the grain, sanded again, and then prepared everything for true oil. I've always liked true oil on necks, and even though it takes time to build it up, it was worth doing. Here I'm mixing up some Z-epoxy for sanding sealer on the body. This is going to seal everything up nice, protect from moisture, and fill any minute pores or slight gaps in my patches or body joints. And when that was good and dry, I sanded it nice and smooth. With the sealer sanded, the body was ready for paint. I gave it a good wipe down with denatured alcohol. Let that dry quick, and then mixed up some acrylic craft store black paint to use as a base coat. That's my primer, and I'm applying it with a little 4-ounce detail gun. This was a bit of an experiment for me. I usually use rattle can lacquers, but I thought I'd try something a little more eco-friendly with the water-based craft store paint. It's definitely more wallet-friendly. Just have to thin it out a little bit and then be careful with your application, but it worked well enough. I was pleased. And with the primer applied, I went ahead and mixed up my color. This was a custom color using more of that acrylic craft paint, some blue aniline dye and alcohol, and then window cleaning fluid as a sort of an extender thinner for making these acrylic craft paints sprayable. Again, worked really well. I was surprised and pleased. The color I was aiming for was sort of a metallic, reminiscent of Pelham blue, and I think I got pretty close. It took 3 spray passes before the color was evened out, and then I was ready to let it dry for a while because we're applying a catalyzed urethane clear coat, which is why you see all the protective gear. It's not something I'll take a chance with, and the garage door is fully open here, so I've got plenty of fresh air coming in. I sprayed 3 good coats of that and then let it cure for 4 days. While that was curing, I returned to the neck. I did a pretty good fret leveling, but the footage for that was corrupted. So once it was leveled, I crowned everything, polished them up. This Moz metal polish is some pretty amazing stuff if you've never used it. And then after 4 days, I took the body down and began the process of level sanding it. Here we're wet sanding with 2,000. We'd already done 1,000 and 1,500. I went ahead and used wet paper all the way up to 2,500 grit before proceeding with polishing compounds. And we use those polishing compounds by hand on the edges. And then I have an old drill set up with a 3-inch pad. And that's how I use my sort of jerry-rigged buffer to bring gloss finishes up to their final gloss. Use a rubbing compound and then a scratch remover. And once I'm satisfied with that, I apply a good coat of wax. And we can begin assembly. So first step is to shield the control cavity with some copper foil. And then to complete the shielding, we apply the same foil to the back of the cavity cover. And onto assembly. The bridge goes in. The bridge plate on, I went ahead and set the pickups. We're using an Iron Gear Platinum 90 for the neck pickup, and then the bridge pickup is an Iron Gear Rolling Mill humbucker. Should be a nice combo. The electronic scheme is as dead simple as it gets. It's a 3-way toggle switch, master volume, master tone, no coil splitting or any other fancy electronics. It's a simple 22 UF cap. Those amber speed knobs are 0 to 11. That's a fun little touch. Get the saddles in place. I like strap blocks. I generally end up retrofitting everything with them anyway, so I just start with them on my guitars. Soldering begins with tinning the wires. I'm sure most of y'all are better at this than I am, but I had a good time doing it. I was patient, didn't rush anything, and I didn't have to redo anything. That's a rare thing for me when wiring up a guitar, even one as simple as this. Just go slow, follow the diagrams. I don't have to understand this stuff in order to actually make it work, apparently, which is kind of a nice thing. And then quick continuity checks everywhere just to make sure everything's properly grounded and that all the things that are supposed to be connected are connected. And just to tempt fate, I'll install the cavity cover before I do any other testing. Tap test is fine. We can put the neck on. Give everything a quick polish. And it's time for strings. Saddles were a little low. I was at first concerned that I hadn't gotten the neck angle correct, but they adjusted up just fine, and they'll have plenty of downward adjustment for the neck to go out of adjustment over time. With it strung up, all that's left is to tune it up. And hear it for the first time. Yeah, this is only my second full build, so that's a really exciting feeling to be able to put one together, plug it in, and immediately be able to do something fun and useful with it. And that's my build. I'm calling it the Kestrel, and I hope you enjoyed it.